Good afternoon, everybody. I'm afraid I don't have the answer, Russell, but we'll see where we get to. On the 23rd of June this year, I was sat in a restaurant with some friends and watching the votes come in effectively with increasing agitation and surprise. Firstly, Sunderland voted to go, which was a little concerning. And then, perhaps less concerning, was Nigel Farage did his concession speech. So we thought, okay, well, we're okay now. And then suddenly, the Brexit vote carried, and 52% of the voters said, let's leave Europe. That was pretty shocking as someone from the UK. So now, thanks to the votes of 17.4 million people, or about 38% of the voting population in the UK, we, as a British person, we are leaving Europe. Scotland and Northern Ireland, of course, voted to stay, as did London. So this is very much an English and Welsh affair, and that doesn't necessarily bode well. Sorry?
Leaving the EU, not
EU, we're
Europe.
not leaving Europe. Well, that's true. So my apologies to the people who are in the room who are part of Europe but not part of the EU. I suspect I'll make that slip up again as we go along. It's accepted analysis that the vote was an anti-politics, anti-immigration vote, and herein lies one of the problems. The UK, which is actually quite similar to the BVI, needs a migrant population, both in low-paid and highly skilled jobs. So now we have this problem where the UK's access to a very large resource base for those that workforce might be about to dry up. It's also the case that the geographic and demographic areas of the UK with the least economic ties to the EU were the areas that were most in favour of leaving it. London, of course, perhaps has the most to lose. Surprisingly, that was in favour of staying. In fact, the area with the biggest vote to stay, anyone know that? Gibraltar actually had a vote. 97% of the voting population in Gibraltar said, can we please stay in the EU? We can wonder why a bit later. Now, in terms of demographics, one Facebook post said, thank you to all the over 65-year-olds for voting in favour of something that will have no effect on them, but will totally ruin everything for the under 35s. I was actually in London. There we go. I was actually in London the week after the Brexit vote, and the mood in Canary Wharf was dire. And yet people were just walking around in shell shock. But actually last week I was in London again, and the mood had improved. People had accepted Brexit, and whilst they don't really know what the answers are, there's a sense of grim determination that people will battle on and everything will be all right in the end. I suspect that most people in this audience have been to presentations about Brexit. They've read a lot about it in the media. Some of those presentations make very bold statements that this is what's going to happen and absolutely this will happen. I don't quite know how they do that. You know, no one knows. Only a historian in 50 years' time will be able to say this is what happened because of Brexit. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. Foresight is obviously a bit of a myth. So I'm not going to sit here and apologise for being a little bit vague in this presentation. I'm rather going to attempt to tie together some of the disparate threads, look at what has happened in the UK so far, and ask what might happen next, and explore why Brexit itself is just one of the many things affecting the BVI and indeed the wider overseas territories and crown dependencies. We've heard about a lot of those things already today. I won't repeat them all in detail, but we'll be tying them in. And I promise I will get to mention Donald Trump as well, which we've probably not heard enough about in the last few weeks. So no answers, just some of my personal views. Hopefully they'll be thought-provoking, and we can have a bit of a discussion at the end. I also hope that my ideas and these ideas will be tinged with a little optimism, if only because I, like both the Brexiteers and the non-Brexiteers, am British. We have a collective stiff upper lip and an esprit de corps which in times of adversity, and by gosh, we are in times of adversity, means that we will make things work, somehow. So, the politics show. Let's consider for a minute, and I'm skipping on, there we go. Let's consider a minute the likely reasons for Brexit vote coming about. Essentially, UKIP was tapping into the groundswell of political discontent about, immigration, loss of wealth, all those sorts of things, and David Cameron had to give them something. so that UKIP didn't do very well in the general election. He offered up a referendum on Europe, effectively staking his own political life on the issue. The Remain camp then was pretty ineffectual when it came to the referendum campaign. So Cameron won the battle of the general election, but lost the war. He resigned, we all know that, and following a very brief period, shortened by Michael Gove's serious and Machiavellian misstep of stabbing Boris Johnson in the back, the quiet lady of Conservative politics, Theresa May, steps up and finds herself in control of the UK and the Brexit problem. Fast forward a few months, and Theresa May, who actually finds herself in the enviable position of not having any credible opposition in the UK, has stated that the UK is going to get on with it and will enact Article 50 by March 2017. So that means, in theory, the UK will have left the EU, not Europe of course, left the EU by the end of the decade. Blink and we will have missed it. What she's also repeatedly said is Brexit means Brexit. But why is she saying that? And what does Brexit actually mean? So, whilst orange might be the new black if you're a Netflix subscriber, generally when someone says X means X, that's a bit of a truism. Origami means origami, dinner for two means dinner for two, and therefore Brexit must mean Brexit. However, it's perhaps worth pausing to try and understand why Theresa May felt the need to say this, and why politicians in the UK keep repeating it. Essentially on the 24th of June, most of the UK woke up and thought, oh my God, what have we done? This has led to a bit of soul searching, and also speculation as to whether or not that can be undone. The answer really is no. But in the early days, you might remember the press, there was an online petition with 5 million signatures for another vote. There were various legal challenges launched that have fallen away. And indeed, there's legal challenges going on now. The latest is a challenge to be heard in the High Court around the nature of the enactment of Article 50. So the government says the people have spoken. We can just get on with it. Now there's a legal challenge saying you need a vote of Parliament to enact Article 50. The government says it's got something called the royal prerogative, which seems a bit of an oddity, given our monarchy doesn't have any powers, political powers, but effectively it was a concept that was developed under the Magna Carta in the 13th century, and probably has Oliver Cromwell turning in his grave. The opposition to that, the people who brought a High Court action, say no, it has to go to Parliament. But the reality is, whether it's successful or not, Brexit does mean Brexit, and therefore, like it or lump it, the nation has decided that we are leaving the EU. So, really we're going to move on to hard versus soft. When Russell suggested the specific wording for this presentation to me, I thought it was going a little bit too far to discuss an over-easy Brexit. A bit of a stretch, but especially when we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, we've not even enacted Article 50. We'll leave that third concept for now and just look at hard v soft. I mean, hard Brexit, that effectively means what all the EU leaders are currently proposing. We're completely out of the EU, we're done. No free movement of goods or people. That, as most of you will know, is a significant problem for the UK, and particularly for London, because of the so-called passporting issue. Effectively, a financial institution in London can comply with UK AML and rules and regulations and other compliance issues, and by doing so, be considered compliant throughout the EU. Hard Brexit takes that away. That's very troubling. However, hard Brexit means the voters get what they want in terms of the restrictions on the movement of economic migrants. Let's hope we don't get hard Brexit, but we'll see where we get to. Soft Brexit. Soft Brexit means nothing really changes. You keep passporting, you keep open borders, which the EU currently says is required if you want free movement of goods. You keep EU regulations, you keep paying, but you don't have any input into how the EU is run. You effectively become Norway. And that doesn't sound very appetizing. Apologies to any Norwegians in the room. So the truth is we will get somewhere in the middle. Negotiations have not even started yet, and so clearly both sides are taking very strong positions. When EU ministers are saying one thing and we're saying another, that's out here. We will end up here at some point. And there are actually some hints as to what might come. The FT this week was talking about Theresa May, and she's saying that she's considering the implications of the UK having to pay billions to the EU in order to maintain passporting. There are also various messages coming out of countries within the EU about how the UK is an important and key partner to it, whatever happens. So, therefore, I probably need to apologise to Russell in that the UK does need to find a middle ground, and that middle ground probably does sound a little bit like Brexit over easy. And that is probably the best we can hope for, and something we all need to strive, well, we can't strive towards, but the UK government will be striving towards. Let's just look at the numbers, the economic aftermath. I, for one, thought we'd almost plunged straight into recession. We haven't done. Exchange rates with the US dollar in particular, 31-year lows. People are now talking about parity with the dollar, which is crazy. Great for me, because I earn US dollars, but not so good for the people in the UK. The Bank of England's interest rates, they're at 0.25%. That's the lowest they've been in the 322-year history of the Bank of England. That means people are still buying properties, just about. It means UK exporters are booming, and it means the FTSE is at an all-time high. So the economy hasn't gone that badly so far. But I think things are about to change. Now, given that most economic commentators and political commentators failed to predict the Brexit vote, indeed the 2008 financial crisis, the dot-com bubble, World War II, pretty much any other major macroeconomic or political event, it's quite risky as an insolvency practitioner for me to try and make any prediction as to what's going to happen going forward. But we'll give it a go. Long-term exchange rates, that's an important part of it. As I say, they're about 1.2 now. A lot of people are talking about them coming to parity. That's a quite scary concept for the economy. And you look at this, it's already beginning to bear fruit. I don't know if anyone's been reading about the Marmite wars going on in the UK at the moment. So really that's a fight between Tesco's and Unilever, which is a proxy for what's going on for the whole retail sector. Tesco's are saying we need to pass on the price rises effectively to our consumers, and trying to say to Unilever, back down, don't pass on the price rises to us. Ultimately, Unilever has to pass them on, because they're bringing the goods into the UK, and Tesco's has to pass on the price rises to consumers, which is not good for the economy. Now, the FTSE stays buoyant, and that'll help, but not if top companies leave the UK, particularly top financial companies. And actually, there's probably a bit of a glimmer of hope here, not because of anything to do with passporting and how that might be solved, but we need to look at the sort of people reality of this. The banks and the people that work for the banks that are based in London want to be based in London. They like it there. Their alternatives are Paris, where they're going to get taxed a lot, and they tend to speak a different language. Dublin, which is probably a bit too small, or Frankfurt, and as much as the Germans might be trumpeting Frankfurt, it's just a little bit dull. So that hopefully means there's a lot of non-economic factors that are actually going to come to bear in the decision to stay in London. And that will have an effect, although we are seeing some of the smaller banks, BTB Bank for example, who already appear to be upping sticks, and that's obviously a bit of a concern. There's other indicators as well. It seems like the London real estate boom cannot continue. It may actually already be over. So there's some very nascent figures coming out about Q3 in London. It suggests that there's a 2.5% drop in property prices in quarter 3 in London, residential property prices. That's significant if that proves to be true once the full range of figures are out. That follows a smaller drop in Q2. Commercial property prices are down 4% in Q3 across the UK. Again, very early doors figures. We're only just getting to the end of the quarter, really. But that suggests that property prices are going the wrong way. We're also seeing, obviously, suspension of real estate funds and other issues around that. Nissan, for example, one of the shining lights of inward investment in the UK, has said they're making no further investment in their Sunderland plant. Ironic, considering Sunderland voted for leaving the EU. And the head of Nissan has been in to see Theresa May to have a chat. That's quite a serious thing to be doing and being publicised. So, in the medium term, it's economically looking a bit gloomy. The World Trade Organization has slashed global growth forecasts. The IMF has slashed UK growth forecasts, although in both instances not by quite as much as Lehman Brothers when that went down, so that's an interesting comparison. They are saying, though, that the UK economy and the global economy, of course, will continue to grow. The IMF says next year it's going to grow by 1.3%. I'm going to stick my neck out and say I think that's a bit optimistic. I actually think we'll probably have two very slight or a double dip recession. I think that the early part of next year we will probably see a very slight downsizing in the UK economy, and that'll then repeat itself once we actually leave Europe in 2019. So what does this mean for the BVI? Now, obviously Brexit's going to impact the BVI. It's going to provide challenges, it's going to provide opportunities. However, attempting to predict how important that effect will be, and indeed even when it will be felt, is even more difficult because the BVI is naturally removed from the events that are going on in the UK. But it's also very important that the Brexit might be the headline, but the only way to even begin to consider the impact on the BVI is to look at the wider context of regulatory pressure and shifting governance priorities that's going on across the globe at the moment. We should also make sure we consider the other overseas territories. And actually I built the Crown dependencies into this bucket as well. It's tempting to lump them all together, but each has their own challenges, their own ways of facing Brexit and everything else that's going on. Cayman is a huge funds business, effectively. It's got a nice sideline in bond issues and listed companies. Cayman's going to be fine. I mean, Cayman's looking at getting EU passporting on its own back at the moment. Indeed, early days in Brexit, there were people talking about the whole UK following the Cayman model. I mean, that's died down as a conversation now, but it is a big, substantial industry in its own effect. Bermuda, very insurance-based, will probably be fine as well. Gibraltar, we've talked about, that's really worried about the UK exit for obvious reasons, much more political. It's sat there, effectively the Achilles heel of Spain. Spain wants it back. We'll see what happens. I think the Channel Islands are worth bearing. When we look at the BVI, the Channel Islands are worth just spending a little bit of time thinking about. They are the home, or one of the key homes of inward investment into the UK. And they're struggling at the moment. They've got a lot of nexus to Europe as well. There is a lot of concern in the Channel Islands about BEPS. And actually, there's a big sense of worry in the Channel Islands. When I talk to my colleagues there, they are concerned. To their advantage, they have their own treaties with Europe and have had them for a long time. But I think for our potential disadvantage and our risk in the BVI is that they're going to start looking elsewhere. What can they do? They've got a lot of incorporations. What's really stopping them trying to become, another BVI, especially as prices continue to drop from Channel Islands service offerings. So BVI, we are, as we've been talking about today, we're the biggest jurisdiction by some margin for incorporations, and for the sort of work that we do. Probably means we've got the most to lose, but also the most to gain, and that's probably by some margin. We've had the spotlight on us a lot recently, but with Brexit and the other issues, let's see where we go. But one of the really important things to remember, and I think this is something we need to make no mistake about, is that we have a lot of strong professionals in the BVI. And you talk to people in Hong Kong, you talk to people in New York, in London, and particularly the people that bother to come and see us. And everyone's always amazed at how much strength and depth we actually do have. That's a fantastic selling point. And actually doing events like this is a really good thing. We had, you might have noticed, there's a chap called Hugh Dickinson who'd snuck into the back of the room earlier. Hugh, I know well, as some of the people in the room do. He's from the Cayman Islands. He came in to see what it was all about. And I talked to him afterwards at lunch, and he was saying, okay, the Cayman Islands just don't bring together this sort of audience and do this sort of thing in terms of, the trade missions, the conferences, etc. We have our strengths, we need to keep playing to them. And I think that as long as the UK doesn't offer up the BVI as some form of sacrificial lamb in its negotiations with the EU to sort of sort out its own position, as long as it sees the BVI as a real source of partnership, as a way to foster investment, its own investment into the EU, into other jurisdictions as it renegotiates its own place in the world, then we're probably in a very good place. We do need to consider all the other bits that are going on, so-called the BEPS and the regulatory beast. That's going to have an effect. It's all part of what we need to be looking at. Does BEPS and third country lists, which we're probably going to be on in the BVI, does it really matter to the BVI? I mean, EU is not a main focal point of our business. So does it matter right now? Maybe not, but I think it does in the future, because again, if we take forward the proposition that we as the BVI can offer quite a bit to the UK when it renegotiates its place in the world and with the EU, then the UK aren't going to want to use us if the Europeans don't want us. The people in the EU don't want us. It makes it a harder sell. However, there is that overall growing trend of protectionism in a world where regulations are really trying to catch up with the speed at which global business can do its business. Global business has grown and operates. So you have FATCA, you have UK FATCA, the FATF task force and other regulatory drivers. And we have to become increasingly transparent. We are doing. And that's fine. It just takes time to get these things across and move forward. What we need to be aware of, though, is there's also a potential backlash to this regulation, the potential for protectionism that's going on. Some of you will probably be, or most of you will be very aware of the challenges Apple have been facing, where the EU has turned around and said, right, you owe us a load, or you owe Ireland, actually, an absolutely massive tax bill. And you, Ireland, have got to go and collect that tax. The EU, the Irish don't like the fact that they're being asked to go and collect 14 billion euros in tax. The US government really don't like it, and Apple don't like it. That could be a flashpoint, particularly when that fight of protectionism gets to the doors of the White House, and particularly if we've got a situation where Donald Trump gets elected. Okay. I think it could still happen. You know, I hate to say it. A few weeks ago, I said actually it might be a lot more likely than we all think. But he does keep tripping up on banana skins. It's Donald Trump, after all. But let's just sort of break it down a bit. If anyone else was running against Hillary Clinton, they'd be almost a shoo-in. The American public do not like Hillary. They do not like the Clintons. The American public do not elect the same party for 3 terms in a row. So this is why, you know, Donald Trump may get there. There is also a significant groundswell in America, which is very similar to what was going on with Brexit, of anti-politics, you know, anti-establishment, and that's what Donald Trump is tapping into, and tapping into very well. Finally, you have to think about the fact that the polls, which everyone's saying Clinton's about 10% ahead now, people don't admit that they support Donald Trump. If I called you up and said, oh, hi, are you going to vote for Donald Trump? You'd almost be tempted to say no out of embarrassment. So I think they're going to be slightly misleading, those numbers. And then you look at the swing states, Ohio, Florida, some of the other big states, it's a much closer margin. So I really hope that we don't have Donald Trump and we don't have gold-plated sinks in the White House. But let's just be aware that that may still happen. And if it does, there's going to be considerable economic and political uncertainty throughout the world. And that'll be have an even more profound effect on the OTs, because we're effectively a microcosm of you know, globalization and the movement of capital. Yeah. So it does mean the future is uncertain. If Trump gets in, it's going to be very, very difficult. So how's this all tied together? And you know, we're going to finish up fairly soon and ask you for your views. We've heard today a lot about globalization, the needs for substance. I'm not going to repeat all those points. I think I will stress that the BVI does need to keep doing what it's beginning to do really well and drive that substance conversation forward, start taking the steps with speed and with the skill that's there. Things like the Bank of Asia, that will help. You know, that's a fantastic initiative from my perspective, and I'll be honest, when I first heard about it, I was skeptical. Every time I come to one of these conferences or talk to someone, another step has been taken. It's getting closer and closer to being a reality, and it sounds like we're going to get there, and that's really fantastic. So, but I think we've got to just be careful that we are at the forefront of discussions with people in London, with the UK, about how they're going to shape their relationships and how we can be part of that process. And if we are doing that, there's a really good opportunity here. We've also got to remember, you talk back to the issues with, you know, 4-letter banks in Hong Kong opening bank accounts, all that sort of stuff. I'm beginning to get calls as an insolvency practitioner, as a restructuring guy, saying, ooh, we set up some structures in Samoa a couple of years ago. It's all going a bit tits up. You know, the BVI is a strong legal jurisdiction with a lot of background, a lot of skill in it. People are beginning to, I think, hopefully realise that and come back to what they know. So, to conclude, we've talked about what I think the main opportunities are. I'd say it's light on the specifics because I don't think we know them. But we need to be there at the forefront of that, and we can do so by offering the sorts of relatively simple vehicles that we have, along with the option of bringing substance to what happens in the BVI, the support of a strong regulator, a very strong legal and financial services sector, and things like BVI forward, a tougher FSC, flights to Miami. All of these things, the bank which we've mentioned, the McKinsey report implementations, they can put us in a really good position when it comes to dealing with all the sorts of issues and opportunities that Brexit give us. So it's kind of up to the people in this room and the people like us that work with BVI structures. The future's really in our hands. It's not in the hands of necessarily what the government does or what specific institutions are. They can facilitate that for us, but we have to be out there and doing it. So is it going to be a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, an over-easy Brexit? Who knows? But I think the BVI can actually have a very good Brexit if we try for one. That's what I've got to say on Brexit. I think we've probably got a little bit of time to just see if anyone else in the room has an opinion. I'm not suggesting questions. I'd just be very interested to hear people's views and thoughts. Does no one care? I'm hoping it won't happen. So, does anyone care about Brexit?
Question. Does the recent precipitous drop in the value of the sterling have much to do with Brexit, and what do you think is the direction of the British pound in the next few months?
Well, actually, I did look at some of the futures pricing online yesterday, so I can vaguely answer this. I think it is absolutely to do with Brexit, the drop. I mean, you only need to look at the drop that happened almost overnight, 23rd of June to 24th of June. Now, I stupidly thought we were going to go the other way, so I sent lots of money back. When I say lots, I don't have lots, but lots for me, just before the Brexit vote. We had that drop. It's been a steady decline since then. There was obviously the drop, which was a bit of a flash drop, algorithms kicking in, which has brought us down to 1.25, even lower, 1.2, 1.25. A lot of the predictors now are that 10 to 12 months out, we're going to get very close to parity with the dollar. That's going to be very difficult for the UK economy. And I think that's why the IMF numbers are optimistic, because those numbers came out for the UK growth before people were predicting that much of a drop. Before, 2-3 months ago, people were saying 1.2, that ceiling won't get broken. So yes, I think it is directly affected. Long term, it will come back up, but it's a big concern.
Yeah, Russell. Yeah, I think you've obviously presented a fairly one-sided view of Brexit, and of course there is an alternative view, which is that for the UK to be free of some of the regulatory burden of the EU will in the long term prove to be of benefit.
I think that's, I take your point, and I actually think that regardless leave or otherwise, we have in the UK and in those sort of outliers of the UK, if you like, if I can call BVI, Cayman, Bermuda, Channel Islands of that, there is such a talent and a body of talent and pool of resource that ultimately will find the way to make it work. Now, clearly, I'm very anti-Brexit, but it's going to happen. And I mean that bit about the stiff upper lip. We're very good at making do. We're one of the best and most nimble, sets of professionals in the world are based in the UK, and I think we can do very well in the end, because that's just what we do. Doesn't mean it's not going to hurt getting there.
They might then further delay her decision to trigger Article 50. She when she first elected, she said that she will trigger the Article 50 before the end of the year, and then she changed her mind.
She was a bit vague just after she was elected, which was probably because she was a bit shocked to find herself, well, she wasn't really elected, was she? That was half the problem. I think she was a bit shocked to find herself in control. She's been pretty firm about saying March 2017. I'm not a lawyer. I bow to the lawyers in the room, but it doesn't seem like this challenge will get too far in terms of whether they enact it or not. I don't think it'll be delayed by much. I think more importantly, the conversation initially was, well, Article 50 is 2 years, but it could get extended. It might take 5 years or 6 years. That conversation stopped. Everyone in Europe and everyone in the UK is saying it's 2 years. Once it started, you're out. So when I said, we'll be done by the end of the decade, I think that's, in my personal view, a very realistic expectation. I said, well, is there any chance of the UK splitting up? Remember, not too long ago, the Scottish only just survived a vote to stay in the UK. And there was a lot of talk by Nicola Sturgeon at a recent conference and in the press about having an early second referendum. It'd be interesting where that went. Now, if oil prices were still over $100 a barrel, I wouldn't be surprised if Scotland then did reverse their decision and had an early referendum and voted to go. But Scotland, with oil prices so low, is so reliant on the English economy, effectively, to help it, that I think at the moment, nothing's going to happen. But I could be very wrong.
But if it were to split, it could attract the whole city of London to Edinburgh.
It's a bit more rainy up there. It's like that every day in Edinburgh. I mean, there was talk of London going its own way at one point, but I think that was just fantasy. So. Okay.